"Oh, don't worry about my mom," my son said with a laugh, raising his glass as the ocean stretched gold behind him. "She's just the extra baggage on this trip." The laughter came easy for everyone else. Light. Effortless. Like it was harmless. Like I was harmless. I stood there on the deck of that massive cruise ship, the wind tugging gently at my silver hair, the scent of salt and sunscreen in the air, and for a moment, I wondered if I had imagined it. But then I saw the way Vanessa smirked behind her champagne glass, the way Daniel didn't look at me after he said it, and I realized something much colder than the ocean beneath us. He meant it. I smiled anyway. I have learned, after 67 years, that dignity is often quiet. That sometimes the strongest thing a woman can do is not react at all. The band kept playing. Glasses clinked. Somewhere behind me, a child laughed. Life went on as if nothing had happened. And maybe to them, nothing had. But to me, something shifted. Something final. A week ago, when Daniel invited me on this cruise, he called it a family getaway. Said it would be good for us. Said Lily had been asking about me. I believed him. I packed carefully, folding each outfit with more care than I'd like to admit, choosing a navy dress for the formal dinner, and bringing along the pearl necklace my late husband gave me on our 30th anniversary. I thought maybe this trip meant I was still part of something. Still included. Still wanted. Now, standing there on that sunlit deck, I understood how wrong I had been. Because when someone calls you extra baggage, they're not just making a joke. They're telling you exactly where you stand in their life. And the cruelest part wasn't even the words. It was how natural it sounded coming from him. As if he'd thought it many times before and was only now saying it out loud. I took a slow sip of my water, steadying my hand. The glass was cool, solid, real. Unlike the moment I had just lived through, which felt oddly distant, like something happening to someone else. Daniel finally glanced at me then, just briefly, as if checking whether I had heard. I held his gaze for half a second. Just enough. Then, I looked away, not out of weakness, but because I had already seen everything I needed to see. And right there, with the sun dipping lower and the ship cutting through calm blue water, I made a decision I didn't say out loud. I would not be anyone's extra baggage. Not anymore. The ocean looked different the next morning, quieter somehow, like it had decided to keep its distance from me, just as my own family had. I woke before sunrise in my cabin, the soft hum of the ship steady beneath my feet, and for a few seconds, I forgot where I was. That happens sometimes at my age. You wake up and expect to see familiar walls, the same ceiling you have looked at for years, the quiet comfort of your own space. But then reality settles in, slow and certain. I was not home. I was on a ship in the middle of the Atlantic, surrounded by people who saw me as something extra, something unnecessary. I sat up slowly, careful with my joints, and reached for my robe. The room was smaller than I had imagined when Daniel first described the trip. Tucked away at the far end of the corridor, 2 decks below where his family was staying. At the time, he said it was just how the bookings worked out. I had nodded, not wanting to be difficult. Now, I understood it differently. I dressed in silence, choosing a simple sweater and slacks, the kind of outfit that does not draw attention. I have spent most of my life not drawing attention. It becomes a habit. When I stepped into the hallway, it was empty, the carpet soft under my shoes, the air faintly scented with something floral and artificial. I made my way up to the breakfast deck alone. The elevators opened to a bright, open space filled with early risers, couples holding hands, families laughing over coffee and pancakes. I stood there for a moment, scanning the room out of instinct, looking for Daniel, for Vanessa, for Lily. They were not there. Of course they were not. I picked up a tray and moved along the buffet, pouring myself a cup of coffee, selecting a piece of toast and some fruit. Simple things. Enough. I found a small table by the window and sat down, watching the endless stretch of water outside. The sun was rising now, casting a soft golden light across the waves. It should have been beautiful. It probably was. But beauty feels different when you have no one to share it with. Halfway through my coffee, I heard a familiar voice behind me. Vanessa. Light, polished, perfectly controlled. She was laughing about something, her tone warm in a way I had never quite received. I turned slightly, just enough to see without being obvious. Daniel sat beside her, scrolling through his phone, barely listening. Lily was there too, swinging her legs under the chair, her small voice cutting through the adult conversation with questions no one fully answered. There was an empty seat at their table. No one had saved it. No one was looking for me. I turned back to my breakfast and took another sip of coffee. It had gone lukewarm. I finished it anyway. That is another habit you develop over time. You stop expecting things to be just right. After a while, Vanessa stood up and suggested they head to the pool deck before it got crowded. Daniel agreed immediately. Lily clapped her hands, excited. They gathered their things and left together, still laughing, still talking, still a unit. No one turned around. No one noticed me sitting 10 feet away. I watched them go until they disappeared into the crowd, and then I looked down at my empty plate. For a long moment, I did not move. I just sat there, listening to the low murmur of strangers, the clink of silverware, the distant sound of the ocean. And that was when it became clear to me, in a way it never had before. This was not a misunderstanding. This was not bad timing or poor communication. This was a pattern. Careful, consistent, intentional. I had not been forgotten. I had been placed, positioned just outside the circle, close enough to be called family when it was convenient, but far enough to be ignored when it was not. I folded my napkin neatly and set it beside my plate. Then I stood up, straightened my shoulders, and walked out of the dining area without looking back, already beginning to see this trip not as a gift, but as something else entirely. By late morning, the ship had settled into its rhythm, the kind that makes everything feel effortless on the surface while something else moves quietly underneath. I found myself walking along the outer deck, one hand resting lightly on the railing, watching the water stretch endlessly in every direction. It is strange how something so vast can make you feel so small, and yet so clear at the same time. I have always believed that clarity does not arrive with noise. It comes in moments like this, when there is nothing left to distract you from what you already know. As I walked, I began to replay things I had ignored before, not just from this trip, but from the past few years. Moments that once seemed insignificant now felt carefully placed, like pieces of a puzzle I had refused to complete. There was the Christmas dinner 3 years ago when Vanessa said they were keeping it small, just the three of them, only for me to see photos later with a full table of friends and neighbors. There was Lily's school recital when I arrived early, only to be told the time had changed, even though every other parent seemed to have the correct schedule. And the birthdays, always rushed, always inconvenient, always squeezed between their plans as if my presence required negotiation. At the time, I explained it away. People are busy. Life changes. Families grow in different directions. That is what I told myself. That is what I wanted to believe. But standing there on that deck, feeling the steady wind against my face, I could no longer pretend it was accidental. It was consistent. Too consistent. A pattern does not need to announce itself. It simply repeats until you are willing to see it. I stopped near a set of lounge chairs, watching as a young couple took turns taking pictures of each other with the ocean behind them. They laughed easily, adjusting angles, making small jokes, leaning into each other without effort. I did not feel envy. Not exactly. Just a quiet awareness of how different things had become. When Daniel was younger, he used to reach for my hand without thinking. Crossing a street, walking through a parking lot, even just standing in line somewhere. It was automatic. Natural. There was a time when I was not something extra in his life. I was central to it. That thought did not make me sad the way it might have before. It made me precise. Because now, I could see the distance not as something that happened to me, but as something that had been allowed to grow, inch by inch, decision by decision. And somewhere along the way, I had adjusted myself to fit into smaller and smaller spaces, until I was barely there at all. A voice broke through my thoughts then, light and familiar. Lily. She came running across the deck, her small shoes tapping against the floor, her hair pulled back in a loose ponytail that bounced with each step. She stopped in front of me, slightly out of breath, but smiling. "Grandma, there you are," she said, as if she had been looking for me. I smiled back, a real one this time. "Here I am," I answered. She glanced over her shoulder, then leaned in a little closer, lowering her voice in that serious way children do when they think they are sharing something important. "Mom said after this trip, things are going to be different," she whispered. I felt something in my chest go still, not heavy, not sharp, just still. "Different how?" I asked gently. Lily shrugged, her expression thoughtful. "She said you might move somewhere else. Somewhere easier. So you do not have to take care of a big house anymore." She said it without malice, without understanding the weight of those words. To her, it was just information. To me, it was confirmation. I nodded slowly, keeping my voice steady. That sounds like a big change, I said. Lily nodded too, then smiled again, already shifting back into the simple joy of being a child. But there is a pool party later, she added, as if that balanced everything. You should come. I touched her shoulder lightly. Maybe I will, I said. She ran off a moment later, her attention already pulled towards something brighter, louder, easier. I watched her go, then turned back to the ocean. The horizon had not changed. It never does. But I had. Because now, for the first time, I was no longer guessing. I knew exactly what they were planning. And more importantly, I knew exactly what I was going to do about it. That afternoon, I returned to my cabin earlier than I needed to, closing the door behind me with a quiet click that seemed louder than it should have been. The room felt smaller now, not because it had changed, but because I was finally seeing it clearly. The narrow bed, the single chair by the wall, the small window that framed nothing but endless water. It was not just a room. It was a placement. Careful. Intentional. I set my handbag down on the dresser and stood there for a moment, letting the silence settle around me. No laughter. No voices. No one knocking to ask if I wanted to join them. I had been given a space that made it easy to forget I was even on the same trip. I walked to the window and rested my fingers lightly against the glass. It was cool, steady, unchanged by anything happening inside this ship. I found myself thinking about the house I had lived in for over 30 years. Every room there had a purpose, a memory, a reason for being exactly where it was. I knew the sound of every floorboard, the way the afternoon light moved across the living room wall, the exact spot where Daniel used to leave his shoes when he came home from school. That house was never just a place to live. It was a life built piece by piece. And now, somewhere between casual conversations and polite smiles, they had decided it was something that could be taken from me. Not directly, not openly, but gradually, with suggestions, with concern, with phrases like easier and more suitable and better for you. I sat down slowly on the edge of the bed, folding my hands in my lap. The words Lily had said echoed again, simple and innocent, but too precise to be imagined. Move somewhere else. Easier. I could almost hear Vanessa's voice shaping those sentences, smoothing them into something that sounded reasonable. That is how it works. It is never presented as taking something away. It is presented as helping you let go. I let out a slow breath and reached for my phone. For a moment, I simply held it, feeling the weight of it in my hand. There are moments in life when you can continue pretending, continue adjusting, continue making yourself smaller to fit what others expect. And then there are moments when you understand that if you do not act, you will disappear entirely. This was one of those moments. I unlocked the screen and scrolled through my contacts until I found a name. I had not called in a long time. Howard Green, my husband's attorney, a man who had always spoken carefully, never wasting words, never making assumptions. I pressed the call button before I could second-guess myself. It rang twice before he answered, his voice exactly as I remembered, steady and professional. Evelyn, he said, a note of surprise in his tone. It has been a while. It has, I replied, keeping my voice even. I hope I am not calling at a bad time. Not at all, he said. What can I do for you? I glanced once more around the small cabin, taking in every detail as if it were evidence of something I needed to remember. I need to review everything, I said. The house, the accounts, the trust, all of it. There was a brief pause on the other end, not hesitation, but consideration. Of course, he said. Has something changed? I looked back at the window, at the endless horizon that had felt so distant before and now seemed almost within reach. Yes, I answered quietly. I have. He did not ask for details. He did not need to. I will prepare everything, he said. We can go over it together as soon as you are ready. I am ready now, I said. And for the first time since stepping onto that ship, I felt something shift inside me that was not pain, not confusion, but something far more solid. Clarity has a weight to it, a shape. It settles into place and does not move. I ended the call and placed the phone carefully on the nightstand. Then I stood up, straightened my shoulders, and looked at my reflection in the mirror across the room. The woman staring back at me did not look smaller anymore. She looked still, and stillness, I have learned, can be very powerful when it is chosen. The rest of the day moved forward as if nothing had changed, And that was exactly what made it so revealing. I stepped out of my cabin later that afternoon, dressed with the same quiet care I had always carried, and made my way toward the upper decks where the music and laughter drifted through the air like something permanent. From a distance, it all looked perfect. Families gathered around tables, children running between chairs, sunlight reflecting off glasses raised in casual celebration. It was the kind of scene people take pictures of, the kind they remember as happy without ever questioning why. I saw them before they saw me. Daniel stood near the bar, one hand resting on the counter, speaking to a couple I did not recognize. Vanessa was beside him, poised as always, her smile precise, her posture effortless. Lily sat at a nearby table, swinging her legs and stirring a drink that was far too colorful to be taken seriously. I slowed my steps just slightly, not to hide, but to observe. There is a difference. When you are no longer trying to belong, you begin to notice things you once ignored. The way Daniel leaned in when he spoke to others, attentive and engaged, but straightened and grew distant the moment Vanessa redirected the conversation. The way Vanessa guided every interaction without appearing to control anything at all. The way decisions were made before anyone realized a decision had been needed. I approached them then, my steps steady, my expression calm. Vanessa was the first to notice me. "Evelyn," she said, her tone warm enough to pass for genuine. "There you are? We were just talking about dinner plans." I nodded slightly, acknowledging her words without stepping into them. "That sounds nice," I said. Daniel glanced at me briefly, then back at the couple he had been speaking with, as if my presence required only a moment of recognition before it could be set aside. "We might try the steakhouse tonight," he added, not quite to me, not quite to anyone. "Reservations fill up fast." "Of course they do," Vanessa replied smoothly. "Good thing we booked ahead." There it was. Small. Simple. Already decided. I felt no surprise. Not anymore. I turned my attention to Lily instead, taking the seat beside her. "What are you having there?" I asked gently. She smiled up at me, bright and open in a way the rest of the world had forgotten how to be. "It is just juice," she said. "Mom said I can have it because we are on vacation." I smiled back, a real one, and for a moment, the noise around us softened. "Vacation rules," I said quietly. She nodded, satisfied, and returned to stirring her drink. At the edge of my awareness, I could hear Vanessa continuing to speak, her voice weaving plans and details together, shaping the evening before it had even begun. Daniel agreed with her easily, as he always did. It was not that he lacked a voice. It was that he had chosen not to use it where it mattered. I sat there, listening without appearing to listen, watching without drawing attention to it. And slowly, something became even clearer than before. This was not about one decision, or one conversation, or even one trip. This was about control, about direction, about a life being adjusted piece by piece until it fit someone else's design. And I had allowed it. Not because I was weak, but because I had believed in something that no longer existed. That belief was gone now. In its place was something far more useful. Understanding. Vanessa turned to me again after a while, her expression still perfectly arranged. "We will head down around 7, she said. "It might be a bit formal, but I think you will enjoy it." I met her eyes then, holding her gaze just long enough to let my words settle where they needed to. "I am sure I will," I replied. And for the first time, I meant something entirely different than what she heard. Because this evening was no longer just another dinner. It was a moment, and I had already begun to prepare for it. That evening arrived with the kind of polished elegance that made everything feel important, even if it was not. The restaurant was lined with soft lighting and quiet music, the kind that never interrupts but always fills the space. Tables were set with crisp white linens, silverware placed with exact precision, glasses catching the glow of chandeliers above. It was beautiful in a way that felt almost rehearsed. I arrived a few minutes early, not out of habit this time, but out of intention. There is a difference between waiting to be included and choosing where you stand. I was shown to the table Daniel had reserved, a larger one near the center of the room, where conversations overlapped and laughter carried just far enough to be noticed. I took my seat without hesitation. When they arrived, Vanessa noticed first, as she always did. Her eyes flickered across the table, taking in every detail, every placement, every variable. "You are early," she said with a soft smile that did not quite reach her eyes. "I like to be prepared," I replied calmly. Daniel pulled out his chair, glancing briefly at me before sitting down. Place looks nice, he said, more to the room than to anyone in particular. Lily slid into her seat beside me, her small presence grounding in a way nothing else in that moment was. The menus were handed out. The server spoke in a smooth, practiced tone, and for a few minutes, everything unfolded exactly as it should. Orders were placed. Drinks were poured. Vanessa guided the conversation with effortless control, asking questions, redirecting topics, keeping everything light and pleasant. Daniel followed her lead, nodding, adding comments when appropriate, laughing at the right moments. It was a performance, a well-practiced one, and for the first time, I was not trying to be part of it. I simply watched. The food arrived in courses, each plate arranged with careful attention, each detail meant to impress. I ate slowly, not out of restraint, but out of awareness. Every movement felt deliberate. Every moment held its place. At some point, Daniel leaned back slightly, his glass in hand, his posture relaxed in that way people become when they believe everything is under control. You know, he began, his tone light, almost playful. Travel really makes you think about what you need and what you do not. Vanessa smiled faintly, already sensing where he was going. Lily looked up, curious but unaware. I set my fork down gently, the soft sound barely noticeable against the quiet hum of the room. It simplifies things, Daniel continued. You start to realize life is easier when you are not carrying unnecessary weight. There it was again. Not the same words, but the same meaning, the same intention. I looked at him then, not with surprise, not with hurt, but with clarity. You are right, I said, my voice even measured. He paused, just slightly, perhaps expecting something else. Resistance, discomfort. Instead, I gave him agreement. Life does become easier when you let go of what no longer fits. I continued. Vanessa's smile held, but her eyes sharpened, watching me more closely now. The air at the table shifted, subtle but undeniable. I reached for my glass, taking a small sip before placing it back down with steady hands. I spoke with Howard this afternoon. I added, my tone unchanged. Daniel frowned slightly, confusion flickering across his face. Howard, he repeated. My attorney, I said simply. I asked him to review everything. The house, the accounts, the trust. The words settled into the space between us, quiet but heavy. Vanessa did not move. Daniel straightened in his chair, his earlier ease gone. What do you mean, review everything? He asked, his voice no longer as relaxed. I met his gaze without hesitation. I mean, I realized something today, I said, and I decided it was time to make sure everything reflects that. The music continued. The lights remained soft. Conversations around us carried on as if nothing had changed. But at our table, something had. And for the first time since this trip began, I was no longer reacting to what they said. I was deciding what came next. Daniel did not respond immediately, and that silence was more revealing than anything he could have said. He looked at me as if trying to measure how serious I was, how far this shift had gone, whether it was something he could smooth over the way he always had before. Vanessa, on the other hand, did not wait. She leaned slightly forward, her expression still composed, but there was a sharpness to her attention now that had not been there earlier. I am sure this is just a precaution, she said, her voice calm and reasonable, the kind of tone that suggests everything is still under control. It is always good to keep things updated. I turned my gaze to her, steady and unhurried. Yes, I said. It is. That was all. No explanation. No reassurance. Just agreement without surrender. The server returned then, placing the next course in front of us with careful precision, unaware of the quiet shift unfolding at the table. Plates were adjusted, utensils aligned, everything exactly as it should be. And yet nothing was the same. Daniel cleared his throat, his posture no longer relaxed. Mom, he said, his voice lower now, more cautious. You do not need to make any big decisions while you are here. This is supposed to be a vacation. I let the word settle for a moment. Vacation. A pause from real life. A place where things are meant to be simple. You are right, I replied. This is a vacation. I picked up my fork again, taking a small bite before continuing, my tone unchanged. And that is exactly why I had the time to think clearly. Vanessa's fingers tightened slightly around her glass, though her smile did not fade. Daniel leaned forward now, his attention fully on me for the first time since the evening began. "Think about what?" he asked. I met his eyes, holding them just long enough to make sure he understood I was not avoiding the question. "About patterns," I said. "About how things have been working. About what is expected of me and what is not." He frowned, a hint of discomfort crossing his face. "I do not understand what you are getting at." "You do," I said quietly. There was no accusation in my voice, no raised tone, just certainty. That is what made it land. Vanessa set her glass down carefully, her movements precise. "Evelyn," she said, her voice still smooth. "If something is bothering you, we can talk about it. There is no need to involve attorneys over something that can be handled as a family." I allowed a small pause before answering, not to create tension, but to let the words settle exactly where they needed to. "This is being handled as a family," I said, "just not in the way you expected." The space between us grew quieter, even as the restaurant around us continued its soft hum of conversation and music. Lily looked between us, sensing something had changed, but not understanding what. She reached for her glass, taking a sip, her world still simple, still untouched by the layers beneath the surface. Daniel leaned back slowly, his expression shifting from confusion to something more cautious. "What exactly did you change?" he asked. There it was. Not concern, not curiosity, the question that mattered. I set my fork down once more, folding my hands lightly in front of me. "I asked Howard to begin restructuring everything," I said. "The house will remain fully under my control. The accounts have been reviewed, and the trust will be updated to reflect what I believe is appropriate moving forward." Vanessa's eyes flickered, just for a second, before she regained her composure. Daniel stared at me, the weight of my words beginning to settle in a way he could not ignore. "Appropriate how?" he asked. I held his gaze, my voice calm, steady, and final. "In a way that does not assume I am something to be managed," I said. "No." One spoke after that. Not for a few seconds. Not for a few breaths. The music continued. The lights remained warm. The illusion of a perfect evening stayed intact for everyone else in that room. But at our table, something had shifted beyond repair. And for the first time, I was not the one adjusting to make things easier. I was the one deciding what would no longer be allowed. The rest of the dinner continued, but not in the same way. Something had shifted beneath the surface, subtle but irreversible, like a current changing direction far below calm water. No one addressed what had just been said directly. They could not. Instead, the conversation moved around it, carefully, deliberately, as if stepping over something fragile that no one wanted to acknowledge. Vanessa resumed speaking first, her voice smooth again, though now there was a faint tension beneath it, like a note slightly off-key. She asked the server about dessert options, commented on the presentation of the meal, even laughed lightly at something Daniel said, but her eyes no longer drifted casually. They returned to me more often now, measuring, recalculating. Daniel, on the other hand, grew quieter. He nodded when appropriate, added short responses, but his earlier ease had disappeared. His posture had changed too, more upright, more aware. It was the posture of someone realizing that the ground beneath them might not be as steady as they believed. I ate slowly, finishing my meal without rushing, without hesitation. There is a certain power in not reacting, in not filling silence with explanation. I had spent years doing that, smoothing over discomfort, making things easier for everyone else. Tonight, I allowed the silence to exist. And in that silence, everything became clearer. When dessert arrived, Lily brightened again, her attention captured by something simple and sweet. She smiled at me, offering a small spoonful from her plate as if sharing could fix anything. I accepted it, gently, because she was not part of this. She was still untouched by it, and I intended to keep it that way. Vanessa declined dessert, claiming she was too full, though her untouched glass suggested something else entirely. Daniel barely looked at his plate. His focus remained on me, though he did not speak. He was waiting, not for me to explain, but for me to soften, to step back into the role I had always played. I did not. When the check came, Daniel reached for it automatically, a gesture so practiced it required no thought. I watched him for a moment before speaking, my voice quiet but clear. "That will not be necessary," I said. He paused, confused, his hand still hovering over the folder. "What do you mean?" he asked. I met his gaze without hesitation. "I will take care of my own expenses from now on," I replied. It was a simple statement. Practical. Reasonable. And yet it landed with more weight than anything else that had been said that evening. Vanessa's expression stilled, her composure holding, but just barely. Daniel slowly withdrew his hand, his movements no longer automatic. "That is not what I meant," he said, his tone tightening. "This is not about the bill." "I know," I answered. "It is about something much larger." I reached into my bag, placing my card on the table with steady fingers. The server returned, processing the payment without noticing anything unusual. To them, it was just another transaction. Another table. Another night. But for me, it was something else entirely. A line. Clear. Defined. Once the receipt was signed, I placed the pen down carefully and stood. Not abruptly. Not dramatically. Just with intention. "I think I will turn in early," I said, my voice calm, unchanged. Lily looked up at me, a small frown crossing her face. "Already?" she asked. I smiled gently, resting a hand on her shoulder. "I will see you in the morning," I said. Vanessa nodded, her expression composed once more, though her eyes remained sharp. "Of course," she said. Daniel did not speak. He simply watched me, as if trying to understand something that no longer fit into the space he had created for me. I did not offer him that understanding. I turned and walked away from the table, my steps steady, my posture straight. The restaurant continued behind me, unchanged, as if nothing had happened. But everything had. And for the first time in a very long time, I was not walking away because I had been dismissed. I was walking away because I had chosen to leave.